Hey everyone, welcome to episode 12 of my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video series. This month, I thought it would be fun to celebrate the 1 year anniversary of the start of the series by focusing on number stamps. I'm joined by my friends Theresa Moxley, Traci Reed, who is Traci M. Reed on Instagram, and Katarina Prevenderova, who is Katka_loves_paper on Instagram, and we're going to be sharing our favorite ways to use number stamps. Before I dive into this month's video, here are some projects that were shared on Instagram using the hashtag SYS scrapbooking over the last month. Kim Ferguson was one of my guest contributors for last month's videos, focusing on stamping on different surfaces other than white cardstock, and she created this fun and colorful layout featuring a cool color changing slider by stamping on some acetate. You all know how much I love interactive elements, so this one really had my heart with her interactive element here. May Flom was one of my other guest contributors, and she shared an awesome technique for stamping on melted embossing powder to create kind of like a faux wax seal. I've never tried this technique myself, but it looks so cool, and I'll definitely give it a try sometime. And Natasha Piglik was my last guest contributor. She shared this gorgeous memory-keeping layout that she created by stamping on some glassine bags that she had in her stash. And I just love the way that the glassine really tones down those pattern papers in her spread and just makes it look kind of like a more soft finish. For my contributions last episode, I shared a fun technique for creating some vellum overlays by stamping on vellum with a stamp set from Everyday Explorers. And for my second layout, I shared how to create some custom cork embellishments with some stamps from Ellie Edwards. In all of our videos, my guest contributors and I shared our favorite inks for stamping on different surfaces, so make sure to check out all of those videos in my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking playlist if you missed any last month. Here's another post that I shared recently on Instagram featuring some stamping, and this page was actually created for Theresa Moxley's In My Pocket collaboration class featuring go-to techniques. Theresa just happens to be one of my guest contributors for this month's Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video series, and one of the categories of lessons in that class is focused on stamping. There are 5 lessons in total for that class, focused on stamping, and then many more lessons featuring different go-to techniques. So be sure to check out that class if you're looking to freshen up your scrapbooking with some new techniques. In this month's video, I'm going to combine my number stamps with some ink blending to create a custom title card for my layout documenting all the different breweries we visited on our Seattle and Portland trip. And for my second project, I'm sharing how I layered lots of different number stamps together to create this title page for one of my Life Crafted albums. For my first layout, I'm going to start by cutting out some large numbers using my Brother Scan & Cut machine to create kind of like paper stencils for my ink blending and stamping technique. I'm using the By the Numbers digital stamp set from Carrie Bradford, and I'm going to import the 1 and the 9 into my Brother Scan & Cut canvas so that I have the number 19. And in this software, I do that by clicking on the image tracing button, selecting the image that I want to trace, then selecting trace areas by color under the tracing options. And I'm making sure that these are nice and lined up on the grid lines before I select both numbers and resize them so that they're about 7 inches tall and take up about 4 inches wide. And that's just so that they can fit nicely on my Life Crafted album page. Once that's done, I'm just going to export this to my cutting machine and just cut it out of some plain white cardstock. So if this is a stencil that you're going to be using more than once, feel free to cut it out of something a bit more durable like stencil material, but I'm just sticking with the white cardstock because I'm just going to be recycling this later on. Next, I've cut out a piece of white cardstock at 4¼ inches wide by 8 inches tall, and that's just the right size to fit onto my Life Crafted album page with a bit of a border around it. And to make sure that my stencil doesn't shift while I'm doing my ink blending, I'm going to use this pixie spray to spray on the back of my stencil before I apply it down to my white cardstock panel. This spray applies a light tackiness to the back of the stencil so that it's stuck into place while I'm doing my ink blending. And you do want to make sure that you're not spraying it directly onto your craft surface because otherwise you'll get tackiness everywhere. So that's why you'll see that I had used that box to hold my paper before I sprayed it down. You also want to make sure that the spray is about 12 inches away from the surface of your paper. I didn't quite have a box large enough to put this in and then spray it from a distance, so I ended up getting a bit too much tackiness on the back of my stencil, but not to worry, I'll deal with that later. For now, I'm just going to hold my stencil against the white cardstock panel up to the light so that I can position the number 19 into the middle of my panel. And I did want to make sure to save that fallout piece from the number 9 as well. I just sprayed the back of that with some more pixie spray, and then I put the number 9 temporarily back into place so that I know exactly where to position that fallout piece. Now that I have my stencil stuck down into place, I'm going to start with my ink blending. So here I've picked out 3 distress ink colors that look kind of like beer colors, going from the lightest on the top to the darkest on the bottom. And these colors are Scattered Straw, Wild Honey, and Rusty Hinge. I decided to use my distress inks here instead of my distress oxide inks because I want the inks to be more translucent and kind of look like these are glasses of beer. So I'm starting at the top with my lightest color using my blending brush, and I'm only blending in the top third of my number 19. Then I'm moving on to the next darkest color, blending in that middle section of my number 19, but making sure to overlap the colors a bit to make sure that I get a nice and even blend. And lastly, I'm blending in my darker color on the bottom, and you want to make sure that the color is more saturated at the very bottom as well, just to provide that nice gradient effect. And to get the best results with ink blending, you do want to make sure that you get your blending brush nice and saturated with ink, and make sure that you're blending the colors together while the inks are still a bit damp. If you wait until the inks are dry before you start blending the next color in, sometimes it doesn't blend as nicely. Once I'm happy with my ink blending, I'm going to start with my stamping. I'm using this numbers stamp set from Ali Edwards' December Daily 2021 collection because I wanted to be able to combine a lot of different fonts, and I'm going to stamp the number 19 repeatedly in different fonts to fill up this large number 19. So just starting with my lightest colored ink as usual and working my way down my page. And as I'm stamping, I'm holding my stamps consistently at a diagonal to provide a bit more interest. And I'm also making sure to stamp down so that my stamp overlaps between the masked off area and the open area where I have my ink blending. And by overlapping my stamping that way, that's going to give a bit more definition to the edges of my ink blending. You'll notice that as I'm moving down my inked panel, I'm also switching out the inks as I'm reaching the different colors of ink blending on my page, so that way my stamping is going to have a gradient similar to the gradient in my ink blending. And lastly, I'm going to make sure to do some second generation stamping as well to give a bit more texture and interest. So to do that, I'm inking up my stamp, then stamping it down on the side of my stencil page, then stamping it down again without re-inking it so that it gives a lighter impression. And I'm going to repeat this with a couple of more of those fonts on the stamp set until I've filled up a lot of the empty spaces in the inked blended areas. Once I'm done with my stamping, I'm going to use a water bleaching technique to add the look of bubbles to my ink blended area. To do that, I'm spraying some water directly into my hand, then flicking it onto my page, and using a scrap piece of paper to blot off the excess water. Because the distress inks are water reactive, you get a really cool bleaching effect wherever the water hit the inky areas, and I'll show a close-up photo of what that looks like once I'm done my layout. I just think this looks really cool and makes it look even more like these are glasses of beer. Once I'm satisfied with my inking and stamping, I'm going to carefully peel off my stencil off of my white cardstock panel. Here you'll see the consequence of me having sprayed the pixie spray a bit too heavy-handedly at the beginning of the video. So there is going to be a bit of a tacky residue left on my page that transferred from the stencil, but I'm just going to use my adhesive eraser to remove all those tacky bits, and my page is good to go after that. Next up, I'm going to start putting together my interactive fold-out page. I've cut a piece of pattern paper from the Ali Edwards hexagon scrapbooking kit down to 4.5 inches wide by 8.25 inches tall, and I've cut a piece of white cardstock down to 9.5 inches wide by 8.25 inches tall, and scored that at 4.5 inches on the 9.5 inch side. The pattern paper is going to go on the front half of this fold out, and the 19 title page is going to get adhered onto the center of that pattern paper. I just like that the pop of yellow is peeking out from behind my title page, and it kind of goes with the yellows in my beer-like 19. Next, I'm using the Storyteller Basics puffy alphabet stickers from the Ali Edwards kit to spell out the word breweries on my title page so that it reads 19 breweries. And I'm going to use my Thickers alphabet alignment guide to make sure that my letters are nice and lined up. And this page is going to go on the left page of my Life Crafted album layout. For the right page of my layout, I've modified one of the 3x8 papers from the Ali Edwards Currently Story Kit so that it has one journaling spot on the page versus 4, and I've enlarged it so that it's 5 inches wide. And then I've cut it down to include an extra 1/2 inch strip of white cardstock on the right side so that I can make a hinge out of that later on. And I've also cut down a piece of white cardstock to 9 inches wide by 8.25 inches tall and scored it at 4.5 inches on the 9-inch side. So I'm going to fold that hinge on my journaling card page and then apply some 3/8 inch score tape on top of that hinge. Then use that to adhere onto the right edge of my other piece of white cardstock that I folded in half. And that'll create like a 3-page booklet on this right side of the page here. Next, just punching the binder ring holes in my page before moving on. I've created a pocket out of some acetate for the front panel of my right page. I've just cut the piece of acetate down to 5.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches tall and scored at 1/2 inch from the bottom 3 sides of the acetate. Then I attached some more 3/8 inch score tape to each of those 3 hinges so that I can attach that down onto my base page. And I'm going to cut out another panel of that hexagon pattern paper to fit inside this pocket as well. This pocket is going to hold some of the ephemera that I collected during our trip to all these different breweries, and I'm going to adhere the coaster that I picked up from one of the breweries on top of that acetate pocket so that all of these ephemera pieces are going to come out of behind that coaster. So here are all of my inserts, and I've also included a list of all of the breweries that we visited that I typed out on one of the 4x6 journaling cards from that same Currently Storing kit. Moving on to the insides of these flipouts, I've printed out 5 panels of 3-inch wide photos that I've put together on Canva, and these are all photos of the different breweries that we visited during our trip. And I'm just adhering them down in order inside these flipouts. Once that's done, I'm going to go and use that same number stamp set again and just stamp out from 1 through to 19 beside all of my photos to correspond with the list of all of the breweries that we visited. And that finishes up this first layout. This definitely took me a long time to put together between figuring out all of the photo sizes and making my little booklets and doing all the inking and stamping. I think this spread took me about an hour to make. But I'm so happy that I was able to include all of the photos from all the different breweries in this one layout, as well as all of the ephemera pieces that I collected during our visits as well. And here are some quick photos before I move on to my next project. For this next project, I'm going to be layering a bunch of different number stamps to create a bright and colorful title page for one of my Life Crafted albums. Here I have one of the digital journaling cards from the July 2022 Stories by the Month kit from Ali Edwards that I've enlarged to 8¼ inches tall, and I've pulled out some of the inks that I had picked out during my ink pairings video that coordinate with this kit, as well as a whole bunch of number stamp sets from Ali Edwards, and I'm going to be stamping out the year 2022 all over this white piece of cardstock. In general, when I'm doing layered stamping, I find it easiest to stick to one color palette, like the one I've picked out here, or alternately just one color group like just blues or just greens, etc. When I'm picking out different stamps, I'm looking for contrasting font types, so combining some that are skinny versus some that are wide, some that are tall versus some that are short. And I'll have a list of all the different stamp sets that I used down in the description box below as well. I even threw in the written numbers stamp set from the Ali Edwards and Laura Wanzik collaboration to stamp the word 20 on top of the 22. I just love the way that the text looks amongst all the numbers that I have going on here. When I'm doing my stamping, I also find that it looks the most visually appealing to me when I stamp out the larger numbers first in a lighter ink color. Then I start adding in the smaller numbers after that in darker ink colors to fill up the empty spots around that. And I do try to only stamp my numbers down either going in one of two directions that are at 90-degree angles to one another. So by the time I'm finished with this page, you'll notice that I'll have numbers either going from left to right, like traditional, or from top to bottom. And I don't have any numbers that are going like upside down or going diagonally because I just find that that creates a bit too much randomness in the page. I also want to make sure that I have an even representation from each of the color groups that I have going on here. And I find the easiest way to do that is to stamp your colors in groups of 3. So for the most part, I have like 3 of the darker blues, I have 3 of the pinky colors, and then I have 2 of the yellows, but I've also thrown in 1 of the orange colors at the end as well. And as I'm doing my stamping, I'm keeping in mind the balance of large and small stamps as well. I do want to make sure that I have large and small stamps evenly distributed across my page, going from the top to the bottom. You'll see that I'm also fiddling around with this 2022 acrylic piece from Colorcast Designs. I did end up not using that on this page, but that's something else that you can add in as well, is to add in a different texture. So now that I have most of my stamping done, I'm going to add my subtitle Volume 3 using the chipboard alphabet stickers from the Ali Edwards Storytelling Basics collection. And again, just using that Thickers alignment guide ruler to help me line up all of my letters. And this just kind of shows me where I have additional spaces that I need to fill up with additional stamping. So here you'll see that I'm turning my page 90 degrees so that I can stamp some of those 2022s going from top to bottom. Another tip that I have with the stamping is that I do like to overhang some of my numbers over the edge of my cardstock panel. I just find that it makes the page flow a bit more organically and less like it's too contained in this one page. Just fiddling around with that acrylic piece a bit longer before I decide to fill up that space with some more stamping. Here I'm pulling out one of the orange colors that I also had in my ink pairings kit. And once that's done, I can adhere this down onto my pattern paper and make sure that the holes are punched so that I can put this into my binder. I ended up not being 100% satisfied with this, so I just pulled out some enamel dots from Citrus Twist kits, and I happen to have some colors that are kind of coordinating with the colors of this kit as well, and with the colors in my stamping. So I'm just going to scatter these enamel dots all over my page, and it makes it look a bit messy, to be honest, once I'm done scattering all of these enamel dots across my page. But I do like the amount of color that it brings in, as well as the fact that I have all of those spots filled in. And just a quick reminder here that practice makes perfect. So I am definitely more of a beginner in terms of stamp layering and creating these kind of messier background pages, but I feel like if I practice more, then I would definitely get better at that. Here are some quick photos of my finished title page, and I do like how it turned out with all the bright and vibrant colors, despite it being a bit messier than I would have liked it to be. I hope you enjoyed those tips and tricks for using number stamps in your scrapbooking projects. I would love to see what you create with number stamps as well, so don't forget to use the hashtag #SYSScrapbooking on Instagram if you decide to try out any of these techniques, or any of the techniques in Theresa, Traci, or Katarina's videos. I'll be sharing new episodes for my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video series on the second Saturday of each month, so make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel for more stamping inspiration. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, and make sure you hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching!